Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Royal Oak Public Library. My name is Matthew Day. I'm head of adult services here. And one of my jobs is to coordinate the programming for adults. So I thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Marina is going to review a book called Flight of Remembrance, having to do with World War II. And I'm sure that you'll all get a great deal out of it. I do want to make a few statements here about the technicalities of it. Unlike usually when we have a program, we're gonna allow you to unmute yourself and to turn on the cameras as well, so that this is more like a natural conversation. You can ask your questions anytime and share your stories. We do encourage that. But if you prefer to use chat, you can do that too. Raise your hand if you want to talk. I think there's a feature that allows you to do that too. So whatever's best for you, whatever you feel comfortable with is fine. There's her email and mine are in the chat box, so you can contact us afterwards if you like.
Matt, there's someone in the waiting room.
Oh, okay. So without any further ado, I'll turn you over to Marina, and thank you again. Okay.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, friends of the Royal Oak Library. I'll start out with a question. Is there value in stories from both sides of a world conflict, or only in those from the victors? That is a question that I thought about long, hard, and often before I wrote my book, because Flight of Remembrance is from the Axis side of the war, and it includes 2 German veterans. Germany, moreover, not only emerged from World War II as the vanquished regime, but in addition, it was the country that was responsible directly or indirectly for the death of 50 to 70 million people worldwide, including millions of Holocaust victims. Now, how can we ever wrap our heads around those kinds of figures? I did a bit of math. If you were to bury 10 people a day, it would take you more than 13,000 years to bury 50 million, and more than 19,000 years to bury 70 million. The first takeaway, World War II was a cataclysm without precedent. I will share my screen now and tell you that I'm happy to be here. I'm happy all of you are here, and I want to thank you for taking the time. What you will hear tonight is part of my family story, not the whole story, but part of my family story as recorded in my book, Flight of Remembrance. The 2 main protagonists, my father, Rolf Dutzmann, a Latvian aeronautical engineering student, and Lilo Wassull, the young woman that he met in 1940 Berlin, who came to be my mother. Way back in 2004, when I was taking a movie treatment writing class, someone in the class made a remark that was food for thought. He said, "But it's a story about Nazis." That was despite the fact that no one in my family on either side joined the Nazi Party or supported Hitler. Still, that question led me to wonder whether the timing would ever be right for a story about German people during World War II. In time, though, I came to realize the benefits and the therapeutic value of a story that gives a face, a name, and humanity to the enemy. So besides preserving memories of World War II, what is to be gained from a story about a conflict that took place about 80 years ago? So I can think of 3 things. First, you will find out what it was like to live through war waged on home soil on the losing side. And when you think about it, that has only happened here in the US once, during and after the Civil War. In addition, you'll gain a little bit of an idea of what it was like to be a displaced person in World War II. The second thing is you'll get a clearer sense of what the people of Ukraine are experiencing today, those who fight and those who flee, and how history tends to repeat itself. The third point, you will hear how love, dreams, and faith in an infinite higher being can prevent despair and promote survival in adversity. That is a theme that you will hear repeated throughout this presentation. Now I'd like to ask two questions. You can feel free to unmute, or you can, excuse me, raise your hands if that is easier for you. I can't see all of you, I think, at one time. However, the first question is, how many of you had ancestors who served in World War II on either side? So I know that I did, and I'm assuming there are no World War II veterans here. They used to still show up. Before COVID, I had a couple of them in a presentation I gave at a lifelong learning institute, but they're showing up less and less often. So if you prefer not to unmute, not to put on your video, not to raise your hand, that's fine. Feel free to record something in chat if you like. And Matt and I will monitor that at the end when we'll have some discussion and questions and answers. The second question, did any of your ancestors live in any of the countries during World War II where the war was fought? That would include Europe, Russia, Japan, China, Philippines, Africa, some parts of Africa, and come to think of it, Hawaii. So again, feel free to put some answers in chat if you like. Now I'd like to go into my family story as shown on the cover of my book. The guy in the helmet, my father, Rolf Dutzmann. He was a Latvian aeronautical engineering student who had to flee Latvia before the first Soviet takeover, ended up in Germany, the only place the family could go. He was drafted into the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. So at this point, he's already been drafted. In the background, you see ruins. That is a ruined family home in Berlin. You will see clearer photographs of that later. Here, my parents, Rolf and Lilo, wedding day, November 1944. A wonderful day for them, but a dark day for actually the world, but Germany especially by that time. My older brother, Ingo, age 2, born in post-war Bavaria. And at the very top, you'll see a little icon, a little plane flying in. That's an icon that I did an illustration of that icon from a photograph of my father, Rolf, flying a pre-World War II Latvian glider. And that little icon represents two things. It represents my father, Rolf's overarching desire to further the field of aeronautical engineering, but also my own quest to gain a higher and wider perspective on World War II through the researching, writing, and now the speaking about my family's story. And the final thing on the cover is the finalist award symbol from the 2012 USA Best Book Awards in the narrative nonfiction category. I'd like to go on now to a different book. I'm wondering if anyone has read this book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's on the World War II suggested reading list, which, by the way, I have uploaded into chat. You can download it from there, but also I will probably send a thank you email to all of you after this event, where I will also include it in the email. This is actually one of the most powerful books that I think I have ever read. Frankl was a Jewish concentration camp survivor, After the war, he founded the third Viennese school of psychotherapy called logotherapy, which focuses on finding meaning in life. Nothing, he wrote, in the world would so effectively help one to survive even the worst of conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life. And Frankl found meaning even in Auschwitz. Now, my parents and grandparents never met Frankl, never read his books, but for them too, love, dreams, and their Lutheran and Catholic faith helped them find meaning and visualize a life beyond the cataclysm. I'd like now to go back to 1924 Latvia. So this is my father Rolf's family. His mother Maria at left, Rolf is the little boy, second from left, and then his little sister Ruth and his father Ernst in Latvian military uniform. My grandfather Ernst also had a dream. So like my dad, his dream was also a technical dream. But in addition, the thing he wanted more than anything in the world, he would sit on the hillside of his family's farm in Latvia as a boy, look out over a sliver of the Baltic Sea in the distance, and he always visualized himself as being captain of a ship bound for America. However, unfortunately, that dream could not come true during World War II. Like millions of young people in the 1920s and 30s all over the world, my father Rolf wanted to be part of the exciting new field of aeronautical engineering. By age 14, he had been building model gliders for many years and could already speak, read, and understand English. And that was a skill that would save his life toward the end of the war. By age 18, he was winning national awards for models like this one, and was also already building a full-size glider and a full-size motorized plane. Here he is now flying that glider, which he built in 1938 with a group called the Izargs. Now, the Izargs were the closest thing that Latvia had to a national guard between the world wars. This photo is the one that inspired the small cover icon. The Izargs were permanently disbanded, unfortunately, after the first Soviet takeover. My grandmother Maria wore the same museum quality dress in 1935 that I usually wear for my presentations. She hand-tailored and embroidered it in the early 1930s, and then later altered it to fit me when I was a teenager. And miraculously, it still fits. The embroidery is an authentic Latvian pattern, and the jewelry, the brooch I'm wearing, is called a Kurzem brooch from the southwestern Baltic region where the family lived in Latvia. We have a remarkable collection of my grandmother's needlework that survived the war. And in addition, letters, photographs, memorabilia, documents. But of all of these things, what is most precious to me is the family history that was written by my parents, Rolf and Lilo. It impressed upon me what a treasure my family's story is and inspired me to share it by writing my book. Now I have a question, and I don't know if anyone would like to unmute and try to answer this. Which country was most feared across Europe during World War II, especially by people of German heritage? Would anyone like to venture a guess? If so, I think you probably can unmute yourself. Feel free to just shout it out. Okay, I'm going to give you the answer. It was the Soviet Union, but most people just called it Russia. In German, it's Russland, which even sounds ominous. In October of 1939, just after the outbreak of the war, my father Rolf was age 20 and was studying aeronautical engineering at the University of Riga when an ominous phone call came in from my grandfather Ernst, urging him to return immediately, to return home. That call marked the end of life as Rolf knew it. A Soviet takeover, he found out, was imminent. And unlike Ukraine today, the small Baltic nations of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia knew that they were completely powerless to prevent a Soviet takeover. And they not only had the Soviet Union on one side, but Nazi Germany on the other, and their backs to the Baltic Sea. They chose not to fight and never even declared war on the Soviet Union, or for that matter, later on, they never declared war on Germany. Like millions of people of German descent, who, by the way, were scattered all across Europe and still are today, the Dutzmann family, including Rolf, faced a high risk of execution or deportation under a Soviet takeover. But the only country offering refuge to Baltic Germans was Nazi Germany. My grandfather Ernst was especially at risk. He had served as a Tsarist Russian officer during World War I, a Latvian officer between the world wars, and in addition, he was an outspoken anti-communist. So to the Dutzmann family in 1939, the verdict on Hitler and the Nazi regime was still out. That's something that can give us food for thought. A lot of people did not quite know yet what to make of the Nazi regime. However, the Stalin regime, like the Putin regime today, had long been recognized as a brutal, aggressive, and oppressive regime with little respect for human life. Rolf and family refused to succumb to despair. Their dreams for the future, their faith in God, their love for each other prompted them to escape Latvia while they could. And so it was that my father Rolf, his sister Maria, my grandmother, his mother Maria, and my aunt Ruth fled Latvia in the fall of 1939. This photograph was taken at that point shortly before they fled. Actually, it was December of 1939 that they fled, along with 50,000 other Latvians of Baltic German heritage. They fled by ship. And their sense of foreboding, it was chillingly accurate. Shortly after the Soviet takeover, Latvian officers who failed to flee were shot on the spot, and tens of thousands of other Latvian citizens were executed or deported. The presidents of Latvia and Estonia died in Siberia. In Poland, the Soviets shot nearly 22,000 Polish military officers and intelligentsia in the Katyn forest and blamed it on Germany. The truth, it only came out after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989. And that same fate, I am sad to report, is likely today for Ukrainian officers and leaders if they are captured. Latvia, along with the other Baltic states, and also Poland and Ukraine, was caught between two brutal regimes during the Second World War. They experienced wave upon wave of tragedy. The Soviet takeover of 1940, then the Nazi takeover, occupation of 1942, during which 75,000 Latvian Jews were heartlessly murdered. This photo is from German wartime archives. Finally, in 1944, another Soviet takeover, and each time mass executions and deportations. In Eastern Europe, this also is food for thought and something I like to stress. During World War II in Eastern Europe, there was no right or wrong side to the war. There was no option to remain neutral. The side that you chose for yourself and your family determined whether you would live or die. And in most cases, such as for Baltic Germans and Jews, the decision was largely dependent on ancestry and ethnicity. German takeovers, which were death sentences for Jews by and large, were initially regarded as liberation by many others who considered the Soviets a far greater threat. People threw in their lot with the side they hoped would spare their lives and the lives of their families. In Estonia, this is a really interesting fact, where Jews were forewarned of the impending German occupation and what would happen to them most likely, as many as 75% fled with the Soviet troops as they left. And most of them survived the war in the Soviet Union, while almost all who stayed behind perished. Mark Twain once said, "War is God's way of teaching Americans geography." Yes, indeed. So to help us, here's a map of December 1939 Northern Europe, by this time already changing exponentially. In the light tan, Germany proper, including East Prussia at the right. In the darker tan, the areas already annexed by Germany, including the former Austria and half of the former Poland. The other half, in red, occupied by the Soviet Union. Also part of the family's story are, at the bottom of the map, Switzerland and Slovakia. And in the north, in green, the Baltic States of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, on the doorstep of the Soviet Union, which is off this map to the right. Rolf and his family lived north of the city of Liepaja in a military enclave called Kara Osta. And that is where my grandfather, Ernst, was head of a department in a munitions laboratory on the Baltic Sea. He was a major in the Latvian army. When the family fled in December 1939, it was from the capital city of Riga along this dotted line to the island of Usedom, which was part of Germany. As soon as their ship left port, they and the 2,000 other Latvians on board became people without a home, people without a national identity, and people at risk of being immediately drafted upon arrival. One of the family's worst fears was soon realized when the regime ordered them to occupied Poland. Where they were sent first was to the city of Posen. And Poland, I might add, was the most dangerous part of the world at that time in history. But today, just think, Poland is a blessed refuge for Ukrainian refugees. Let's take a look now at a new map that I created in connection with the unfolding conflict in Ukraine. Instead of the League of Nations, which formed after World War I, but then was disbanded in 1945 after failing to prevent World War II, we now have the powerful combo of the NATO military alliance formed in 1949 and the EU economic alliance since 1993. They work together with the aim of preventing another worldwide catastrophe. Many countries of Europe are members of both, but it's complicated. And remember, NATO also includes other countries like the US, Canada, Japan, etc. On this map, the countries in medium green are EU members. Finland and Sweden are members of the EU, but not of NATO. However, they now want to become members of NATO since the war in Ukraine commenced. They had maintained neutrality since World War II, but are now in the process of being accepted into NATO. In lighter green, countries including Ukraine that have applied but are not yet accepted into the EU. A few of them, including Turkey and Montenegro, are NATO members, however. Notice little Moldova curled into the southwestern part of Ukraine. Moldova is neither a NATO nor an EU member, but has applied to the EU after the invasion of Ukraine commenced. In the darker green, Switzerland, the UK, Norway. They are not EU members, but the latter two are members of NATO. And in red, Russian-controlled territory includes not only the vast area extending way off the right side of the map, but also, for all practical purposes, Belarus in light red, which is an ally of Russia and allowed Russian troops to invade Ukraine across its southern borders. Ukrainians, therefore, today are once again facing tragedy. The 1930s genocide under Stalin and the carnage of World War II are still vivid in their collective memory. But now, fortunately, there is a united NATO and EU to the west. At the southern end of Ukraine in red is the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia seized from Ukraine in 2014. Ukraine, therefore, is hemmed in on three sides by hostile Russian territory, including by this time parts of the country itself in the east. Most startling, however, might be the small Russian holding between Poland and Lithuania. What's that, you ask? It's Kaliningrad, formerly a part of Germany called East Prussia, which you saw earlier on the other map, but was given to the Soviet Union under the Potsdam Agreement at the close of World War II. Kaliningrad increases the current threat to all of Europe, but especially the Baltic states. Look at where they are located. They have their backs to the sea and only a small section of common border between Lithuania and Poland. Otherwise, they are surrounded by Russian or pro-Russian territory. Enough digression. Let's get back to the family story. My father, Rolf, writing in his diary on the train to occupied Poland, it is early 1940. He is apprehensive whether the Nazi regime will draft him or whether they will allow him to continue his aeronautical engineering education. At right, on the left-hand side of the photo, my grandmother Maria, pondering what the family's fate will be. There were great concerns for Rolf's father, Ernst, as well, because of his technical skills, which were bound to be desirable to the Nazi regime. The family's initial fate in Posen, they were accommodated in crude, unheated barracks. They received dismal rations and slept on the floor on straw. But that too didn't last for long. From Posen, they were ordered further east to Litzmannstadt, Łódź, even closer to the Soviet threat. And shortly after that, to Berlin, where by October of 1942, the Nazi regime was already fully aware of my grandfather Ernst's technical skills. The regime drafted him as a major into the Wehrmacht, the German army, and sent him back to the island of Usedom, to the top secret development center of Peenemünde, where he trained for V-2 rocket inspection under Werner von Braun, the German rocket genius. No doubt many of you or some of you have heard of Werner von Braun. But that site, that development center, was bombed in August of 1943. After that, the regime chose a safer location for mass production of the V-1 and the V-2 rockets. And that was here in the heart of Germany. Oh, we just went to Usedom. Here in the heart of Germany, near a town called Nordhausen. And for the last 14 months of the war, my grandfather Ernst worked there as chief inspector of the V-2 at that classified underground installation called Mittelwerk. It's surprising to some, maybe many, attendees at my presentations that no one on either side of my family, not even my grandfather, supported Hitler or joined the Nazi Party. He was never required to, and in fact, there might have even been some prejudice against him because he was Latvian and not pure German. And as a result, not even he joined. However, he and my entire family from Latvia, the family that fled Latvia, recognized that their refuge was Nazi Germany. It just was a fact for the family. They would not have survived in Latvia. A bit later, I will mention the city of Danzig or Gdańsk, which is located in Poland on the Baltic Sea. You're going to see it flying in. There it is. I will mention that again later on in connection with my father Rolf's education. Now look at, first of all, before I leave this map, I just want to point out the areas in tan and brown on this map. Make a mental note of what's tan and brown and what all around it is not. Now look at this version of that same map. It shows a catastrophe that was Europe by mid-1944, with German-occupied countries in brown, along with Italy at the bottom, which entered the war on the side of Germany in 1940. At this point, the only countries on this map that were still free were Finland, along with the neutral countries of Switzerland and Sweden. And off this map, of course, Great Britain, Spain, and Portugal. Great Britain fought the Nazi threat valiantly alone until the US entered the war in December 1941. The other half of the story is about my mother, Lilo Wassull. She was born and raised in Berlin. Here she's age 2 with her parents, Gertrude and Walter. And here at age 11, with a strong faith in God from a young age, Lilo refused to join the League of German Girls, equivalent to the Hitler Youth for boys. She considered them to be sinister, fanatical, and atheistic. She chose to graduate early because she found out that membership in the Nazi youth groups would become compulsory for all school-age children the following year. Lilo also had a dream. It was for a harmonious home and family life, which was lacking in her childhood due to her parents' rocky marriage and ultimate divorce. Here, she's age 19, and she will very shortly meet my father, Rolf, at an afternoon dance in Berlin, and her dream would soon get underway. In mid-1940, so a few months after Rolf was on the train, Rolf received word that he would be allowed to finish his aeronautical engineering education in the city of Gdańsk, which I showed you on the map. That was the city that flew in. He hoped the war would be long over before he graduated, because he was quite certain what would happen if it was still raging at that point. Once a free city of Europe, Gdańsk was no longer free. This photo is from Getty Images. In late 1941, Rolf's dream came crashing down. Arriving simultaneously with his diploma was a draft notice into the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. Here, he may have been reading about every German soldier's worst fear, the Eastern Front. Stories of unspeakable horror were filtering back from the snowbound Russian countryside, and they were often in the news. Rolf, though, was fortunate to be employed in a technical capacity for most of the war. He taught aerodynamics and airplane design. He engaged in glider flight and navigator training, and these were all pursuits that not only supported his dream, but more importantly, kept him from being sent to the front until very late in the war. He never flew bombing or combat missions against the Allies. And I can't tell you how glad I am to be able to say that to an American audience. Nearly 1.4 million tons of bombs fell on Germany during the war. And I have to tell you, I receive notices about World War II news every Friday from a Google search. And many times still to this day, there are reports of World War II bombs undetonated, being found in some German city or near a railroad track or somewhere where they then have to evacuate blocks and blocks of people. They will probably never find all the bombs in Germany. Shown here on this map was a target, is Berlin, which was a target of 363 air raids by the British, the Americans, and the Soviets. And I would ask you this question, except I don't think anyone wants to unmute. There were two cities that were bombed even worse in terms of intensity and just damage, the resulting devastation, worse than Berlin. I'm wondering if anyone knows. If someone would like to unmute and tell me what those cities were, I would welcome it, but I'm going to count to 4. 1, yes, Matt.
Was it Dresden, one of them?
Dresden?
Yes, yes, so
the other
right,
one?
Dresden. Okay, what was the other city? Does anyone know?
I don't know.
It's in the northern part of Germany, closer to the sea. Hamburg.
Hamburg?
Oh, okay, all right, you had it at the same time that I said it. So here they are, they're flying in, Hamburg and Dresden. Shown here is the ruined family home in Berlin, the exterior and the interior. The only reason we have these photos is because my father, Rolf, was allowed to take bombing leave and travel to Berlin to inspect the damage. Some of the cities in Ukraine that we have been seeing in the news, Mariupol, Kharkiv, and many others, look as bad or worse than this, which is unbelievable to even begin to contemplate. My mother Lilo's home was also destroyed, but we have no photos. It was destroyed one floor at a time until finally the top 2 floors blown away, walls and ceilings badly damaged, windows shattered, pipes burst, and water flowing into the apartment. She and her mother Gertrude could no longer live there. But the regime would not allow working people to leave Berlin. However, love and dreams, they persisted and finally received permission to move out of the city in March 1944. By that time, the bombing had already become very severe in Berlin. The rest of Lilo's family, though, remained trapped in the Soviet zone, which later became East Germany, and Lilo never saw them again. That included her father. History is now repeating itself, yet again, with Ukrainian families parted by the chaos of war. Here now is the only known photograph of my grandfather Ernst as chief inspector of the V2 at the vast underground mass production center called Middlework. Oh, someone needs admission here. Let me see if I can admit Karen.
I got it.
Karen, are you back? Okay, hopefully Karen is back. All right, so this is the only known photograph of my grandfather in that underground installation where he served as chief inspector. I had to conduct a lot of research into his role during the war because he never talked about it. Now imagine I was still reading books right toward the end of what I thought would be the end of writing my book. I thought I was done when I found out there was a horrific slave labor camp set up outside the gates of this installation. And I have to tell you, my heart sank down to my feet when I read that. And I wondered, what would I possibly find out about my grandfather's role there? So my grandfather was in charge, I found out, of the inspection department with more than 200 Army and civilian engineers and 3 inmates working under him. Again, I dreaded what I might discover, but I was relieved when I found books and post-war transcripts from inmates, which indicated that Major Ernst Dutzmann of the Wehrmacht befriended and saved the life of Czech inmate Yuri Benish, saved him from execution in the underground tunnel network, and protected all 3 inmates as best he could but it was under dire circumstances. He himself could have been executed as well. Benesch survived the war and later wrote a book where he included details about his conversations and interactions with my grandfather. This photo was only discovered after Ernst's death and was donated by me in 2011 to the memorial at the site of the former camp with other documents. I have 3 regrets. First, that I didn't know the questions to ask my grandfather when he was still alive. I know he would have answered them very candidly because that's the kind of man he was. The second thing that I regret is that he probably never knew that Yuri Benesch had survived the war. And 3, I regretted that he will always probably be listed among the perpetrators just for having worked in that place. Here now is a photograph of a rubble-filled tunnel in the vast underground network as it looks today at the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp memorial. And that memorial, by the way, commemorates not the advanced rocket technology that was carried out there, but the inmates who toiled and died. By November 1944, Allied troops were poised to strike into Germany proper from both the East and the West. But in spite of that, a love story was unfolding that would continue over 70 years and across 2 continents. But the most dangerous times for German civilians and military personnel were still ahead. Within 6 months of these wedding photos, both Rolf and Ernst would be taken prisoner of war, and Lilo and her mother Gertrude would be forced to flee the advancing Soviet troops more than once, the first time on foot across mountains. Worst of all, for nearly a year after the wedding, neither Lilo nor Rolf even knew if the other was still alive. In March 1945, shortly after this photo was taken, Rolf at this point was in Slovakia. He was in between military assignments and working on a farm. He rescued that little kitten and then left it with the farm family when he was forced to leave. But shortly after this photo was taken, he and tens of thousands of other German military personnel were sent to the front. It was the Nazi regime's last desperate attempt to turn the tide of the war. But there were no weapons left to give out, and the war was as good as over. Everyone knew it. Rolf's unit was ordered to disperse, to desert, escape the front, walk homeward. Rolf walked 160 miles cross-country homeward in late winter, hoping that there was still a home and a family to return to. Because this, my friends, is the main difference between war waged somewhere in a faraway country and war waged on home soil. Not only military personnel, but family members, homes, businesses, everything is in harm's way. And we see that so tragically playing out now in Ukraine. Between this photo and the next, I'm leaving out the most cathartic part of the story for you to read about in the book, Flight of Remembrance. How love, dreams, and faith, aided by Lilo's mother Gertrude, my grandmother, forged a dramatic reunion and helped a family survive the most destructive time in world history. Now, my favorite post-war photo of my parents, Rolf and Lilo. They are smiling down at their post-war dream, my older brother Ingo at age 2. By age 3, lo and behold, their post-war dream had grown a tail, sewn onto his overalls by my other grandmother, Maria, who made the embroidered dress that I showed earlier. This is a good point for me to interject something that I think a lot of people wonder about. As children of German people, my brother Ingo and I have a younger brother too, but he was born here in America He's really an American. Ingo and I don't know, we kind of span both continents in a way. We have had questions about complicity and awareness most of our lives. How much did they, our family members included, know about death camps and the Holocaust? Originally, I thought everyone must have known. So many victims, so many perpetrators. After years of reading, research, and discussion, however, including with my parents, I realized the truth is not so simple. Most in the upper echelons of the military, the government, and some industries were aware of everything. And I will add this, everyone across the board knew of the existence of concentration camps, but they didn't necessarily know what happened there or who was sent there. Neither Nazi-controlled media nor Allied sources published accounts of the killings during the war, and the regime was very careful to hide the truth of deliberate genocide from many of its citizens. Just as in Russia today, the Nazi regime fabricated and disseminated distorted versions of the truth, more palatable versions. As we see even in the US today, false reports and conspiracy theories are believed by many people to the detriment of democracy. Rolf and Lilo were horrified to find out about the industrial scale genocide from foreign publications after the war. Even my grandfather Ernst, so this is something I would have loved to ask him, had he still been alive when I was writing my book, he may not have been fully aware of the genocide either, because camps at the installations where he worked held mainly captured partisans and resistance fighters, and very few Jews or members of persecuted groups. Toward the very, very end of the war, Hungarian Jews were sent to the camp at Middlework, where my grandfather worked. So how much did he know? Who knows? There is a book on my suggested reading list in chat if you'd like to download it, entitled What We Knew by authors Johnson and Rubin. It concludes that about 1/3 of the population knew all of the gruesome details, about 1/3 suspected but had no proof, and 1/3 may have been clueless. As we realize today, freedom and democracy are not self-perpetuating. They are preserved only by informed, vigilant, and socially active citizens. So my family survived World War II, but post-war Germany was a humanitarian disaster site. Its ruined cities were inundated by 14 million homeless, hungry, impoverished refugees. And not only they, but everyone was starving, and that included my parents. They often gave up their food to feed my brother Ingo. Today's conflict in Ukraine is causing the fastest growing humanitarian crisis since World War II. But fortunately, what does Europe have now? Europe now has the EU to help coordinate assistance. Worst of all, after World War II, though, was a continuing Soviet threat, a threat that is renewed by Russia today. I will now ask another question. If you'd like to unmute, I'm going to give it just like a fraction of a minute. Do we have any immigrants or refugees in the audience? If you are an immigrant or refugee or displaced person living in the US, please either unmute and tell us or put some information in chat that we can discuss later. The second question, how many of you are children or grandchildren of immigrants or refugees or displaced persons? I know I am. Actually, I am an immigrant. My hand should have been up with the first one. If your answer is yes to either of these questions, please let us know where you or your family members are from. You can put that in chat if you like. So for my family, it was thanks to the generosity of total strangers in a tiny farming community in northern Indiana that we were able to immigrate to the US in late 1951. On a dismal, foggy December day, Rolf, Lilo, who was 8 months pregnant, and 4-year-old Ingo took their leave of Germany and traveled across a rubble-strewn Germany to Switzerland, only to find upon arrival that their flight to America would be postponed due to the fog that covered all of Northern Europe that day. But the next morning, on the brink of my family's odyssey to the New World, I arrived. Oh, here they are. They're leaving Germany. And then that night in Zurich, Switzerland, a neutral country, I arrived. And I totally disrupted our immigration plans by my premature arrival. A couple of weeks later, though, we finally arrived in Wakarusa, Indiana, where our generous sponsors lived. We owe them a lifelong debt of gratitude. I dedicated Flight of Remembrance to them, as well as to my parents, Rolf and Lilo. I provided several presentations there since 2012, and also renewed ties with some people who still remembered our family. Love and dreams. Here, my brothers and I are in the backyard of our first rented house in Wakarusa, Indiana. Now, do you remember me mentioning my grandfather Ernst's boyhood dream to be captain of a ship bound for America? In early 1952, he and my grandmother Maria boarded a ship bound for America. He wasn't captain of the ship, but with his skills no longer tied to the military of any world regime, I like to think that he finally became the captain of his own destiny. In 1958, we became naturalized US citizens. Proud ones, I might say. In a remarkable twist on a lifelong dream, both my father Rolf and my grandfather Ernst were soon hired by Chrysler Missile and Space Division, right near you there. It used to be in Warren, Michigan. And that is where my father Rolf headed a team of engineers who designed and built components of the Saturn 1B rocket. Those were later used successfully in all of the Apollo moon missions. So amazing to me is that despite the upheaval and devastation of war, my father Rolf's career expanded far beyond his original aeronautical engineering dream to a key role in the emerging US space program. And Lilo, my mother, she achieved her dream as well, the dream of a harmonious marriage and family life. I do want to add that my maternal grandmother, Gertrude, who is a major mover and shaker in the family story, is at back right in this photo. Some people tell me she is their favorite character in the entire book. After retiring to New Hampshire in 1982, Rolf found new meaning in his life. For over 30 years, he shared his aerospace knowledge and enthusiasm with thousands of children and adults across the state of New Hampshire. Here, he's leading a young astronauts program in Alton, New Hampshire. And here, a model rocket launch in Kensington in 2011. My parents' love story is as much about finding meaning, cherishing a dream, and living a life of faith in God as it is about surviving war. I encourage each of you to find the gem of meaning in your life that you can use to uplift other people. And now in closing, this photo from a 2013 model rocket launch is a reminder that what we share lives on in the lives and memories of those we inspire. It's also a reminder to speak up and take action on issues that matter. May our efforts today, as we stand with Ukraine and the rest of the free world, launch a tomorrow free of war and genocide, blessed with liberty and justice, where all people can fulfill their dreams and their life's purpose. Thank you, everyone. I have thoroughly enjoyed presenting to you. I would just like to, before we start discussion, I'd like to mention that my book is available on Amazon or on my website. You can access the Amazon page and also other links right from my website. It's available in both print and Kindle versions. You can also contact me via my website or contact me via my email address, which you'll find in chat. It's mdkirsch, KIRSCH 5@gmail.com. And now I am going to unshare my screen and put us back in gallery view. I can't see very many of you. Matt, I see you. Heyun, my friend from New Hampshire, I see you. So I'd like to know if people have questions. Okay, someone's saying, I'm eating dinner and watching, so my camera will be off. I fully
that was me. That was me in the beginning.
Oh, that was you. Okay. Okay, to answer number 2. Okay, someone said, maybe this is Heyun. My parents went through the liberation of Korea from Japan when the Japanese lost the war.
Yes,
Is that from you?
that was me. Yes.
Heyun, would you like to add anything further about your family's story?
Well, my parents were young married couple when they went through liberation. They were under the occupation of Japanese. It was 40 years of a very brutal occupation. They abused Koreans. They stripped the Koreans natural resources. Story is really horrifying, not to match Nazi regime, but as close. So when the liberation came, after Hiroshima bomb, that was the best day of Korea, 1948. And soon it was followed by Korean War in 1950, which Americans and all the NATO allies came and really helped us. So we are forever grateful to America and all the veterans. And every time I hear of these war stories, it's so sad why this beautiful earth that we have to go through such war. And I'm just praying that there'll be a peace on earth one day, that we will never have to see the war ever again.
I agree with that. Unfortunately, we are seeing it again. And I fear that the less history is taught anymore, and the less we see history programs covered and presented, the more likely we will be to repeat the mistakes of the past. I'm wondering how others feel about that. Now, Karen Thiel. Karen, I think I know you. Are you a friend of my friend Karen, formerly Karen Maas, now Karen Koch? I don't know if you can unmute. You say your father was your father in Germany? And you also had ancestors in the UK. Okay, all right. And let's see, someone else answered yes, but I don't know what the answer is. All right, Karen Thiel. All right, Karen, yeah, your later answer was the answer to the question. Which country did most people fear, especially if they were of German descent? It was Russia or Soviet Union. Your mother and grandparents, Karen, immigrated to the US, I'm taking. And Matt, grandparents came from Scotland? You're muted, Matt.
I did take a DNA test a couple of years ago, and I discovered that one of my grandfathers was Jewish from Central Europe, but I don't really know anything about him.
Uh-huh. So did he flee to Scotland?
No, he fled to Toronto.
To Toronto, okay, yes.
Yeah, he was
Fled to Canada.
yeah, he was a concert
after-
violinist in Toronto.
Uh-huh, okay.
But,
And a lot of people after the war also immigrated to Toronto.
yeah, my other grandparents all immigrated from Canada.
Uh-huh.
By way of Toronto.
All right, I'm wondering if anybody has questions. That includes you, Matt. Any questions from the audience? You can either type into chat. Let's see, there's a new message I see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Karen says she was not able to unmute. I'm wondering, Matt, can you unmute everyone, or let's see, can I? Let me see, let me look at participants here.
Let's see.
I'm not sure that I can, oh, wait a minute. I can mute all, but okay. I just clicked ask all to unmute. You might have a little window coming on. And if that comes on, then try to unmute. Okay, I also just clicked allow participants to unmute themselves. Okay, Karen, I see you're unmuted now. Karen, would you like to tell us anything about your family? We can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay, Bill Bidwell is or was unmuted. All right. Oh, yes, okay, Karen, you attended Trinity, which I also did in Michigan. So I did grow up in Michigan. We lived in Indiana only for about the first 2.5 years of my life. When we flew from Germany to the US, not from Germany, from Switzerland to the US, I was 11 days old. And when I was about 2.5 to 3 years old, we moved to Michigan, first to Saginaw, and then to Utica, which later became Sterling Heights. And my father, as I mentioned, and my grandfather also worked at Chrysler Missile and Space Division in Warren, Michigan. So Karen, I cannot hear you. I don't know if you're saying anything. You're asking me if I can hear you, but I can't. So it might be that your volume in Zoom or on your computer is turned down too low, your output volume. All right, you say you remember my family from Trinity. So I'd like to mention another thing. This is a fact about World War II that I find totally amazing. So in January of 1945, at a time when there were still thousands of refugees and displaced persons fleeing Eastern Europe, many of them were people of German descent who had to flee westward, and Germany was the only country that was accepting them. There was a ship called the Wilhelm Gustloff. I'm wondering if anybody has ever heard of it. Anybody who's unmuted or that I can see? So the Wilhelm Gustloff, it was actually a pleasure ship during peacetime, but in wartime, it was turned into a refugee ship. It was to help transport refugees from the eastern part of Europe, mostly women and children, to Germany. And in January of 1945, the Wilhelm Gustloff was torpedoed by a Soviet submarine. It is the largest maritime disaster in history, and yet hardly anyone knows about it. I did not know about it when I was writing my book. Matt, have you ever heard of it?
No, I never heard of it.
Okay.
Was it larger than Titanic?
It's much, almost 9,000 people died. Actually, almost 10,000 fatalities, over 9,000 people in one cold January night.
I've never heard. That story needs to be told.
So my suggested reading list includes, I forget, 1 or 2 books about the Wilhelm Gustloff, but also websites. If you Google it, let's see, I'll type it into chat. Let's see, did I spell it right? No. Wilhelm Gustloff. Okay, I'm sending it to everyone. there it goes. If you Google that, you'll find all kinds of websites. And a couple of them are also on my suggested reading list. If you either download it or receive it later via a thank you email from me, you can read more about it. It's a tragic but fascinating story. So another thing, my mother Lilo, whom I talked about in this story, she is still alive. She's almost 102. I
Wow.
visit her every day right now because she is now in the last couple of weeks in failing health. But until that time, she was still sharp and just amazingly mentally agile. My brother Ingo, who is mentioned in the story, the little boy who was born in post-war Bavaria, passed away last January, sadly, way
Sorry.
too soon.
Yeah.
But my family has been in touch again in recent times since my book was written with some of the people who feature in the story. The Biddingers, who are the pastor and his wife, who helped our family come to the US. It was thanks to him and his congregation, in fact, that we were able to come. They were not our immediate sponsors, but they helped make it possible.
Mm.
We reconnected with them, and for many years, my parents continued to communicate with them, and I too. My mother's half-sister in the eastern part of Germany was located again, and the granddaughter of our sponsors in Indiana was located. She too, though, has sadly passed away since. I'm wondering if anything in this story has been a surprise to anyone who is able to unmute and speak. Oh, Karen Thiel, you're saying, yes, that's right. And Bill Bidwell too. You and Bill Bidwell and Haiti Moss attended my presentation at Bellbrook, Sanctuary at Bellbrook a few years ago in Michigan. Yeah. And last year in August, I spoke at the Southfield, Michigan Library. All right, so. Yes, someone said Becky B to everyone. I was surprised they didn't make your family join the Nazi Party. Interesting. Yes, now there were people who felt pressured to join if they were high profile. One thing I need to add though, my mother and my grandmother Gertrude were pretty low profile, and they never hung a flag out their front window. My mother at times was worried that they might be picked up on that, but they never were. And also my mother and grandmother had to move around a bit. They lived in different places. And then before they were able to flee Berlin and move to a safer area, which only the regime could give them permission to do, they actually slept in a storage space that they rented outside the city because sleeping in the city had become too dangerous and their apartment was destroyed. As for my grandfather and family, I think that there might have been a bit of prejudice. So if you read my book, you'll find that my father had a prejudiced comment aimed at him after the family arrived in Germany, that he was from Latvia. Now, he wasn't actually born in Latvia. He was born in Germany, but by the time he was 2 years old, my grandparents moved back to Latvia, which was my grandfather's birthplace, but my grandmother was German. It gets complicated, people. So Dad really only knew Latvia as his homeland, and he was discriminated against a bit for that. And I suspect my grandfather was too. Latvians were not considered prime German people. So I think that's part of the reason, but I don't know for sure. What I can tell you is members of the Nazi Party can be found online. So it was with a little bit of trepidation that I checked there some years ago. In fact, I didn't even know about that list until after my book was published, but I went and looked, and my family members are not on there. Thank God. So I'd like to just know, are there any other comments or questions? Matt, do you see anything else that we should address?
Somebody's asking about where you're going to present again, any upcoming events?
Oh, I do have another event next week. Would you like to travel to New Hampshire? So unless you live in New Hampshire, I'm going to be in Stratford, New Hampshire at the library there. I am with New Hampshire Humanities here in the Granite State. So I present all around the state at big libraries and small, and also at other nonprofits, so museums and senior communities and other places. Not only nonprofits, sometimes the senior communities are for profit. So let me just give you a little word about that. If you know of any place that would like to have me come and speak, I am available either on Zoom and sometimes when possible live. I still prefer live events and I'm willing somewhat to travel. So I've traveled as far as Nebraska. That one was a plane flight though. And I've spoken in 10 states besides New Hampshire. So I love to travel. I love road trips, in fact. So let me know. I will be sending an email to all of you and will invite you to join my email list for upcoming events. Karen Thiel says, my great-great-grandparents were from Germany, Wilhelmina Rodenbeck and Dietrich Thiel. Karen, would you like to say anything further about that? Did they immigrate to the US? I don't know if we can hear you, unfortunately. Okay, I cannot hear you, unfortunately, Karen. I don't know if you want to put anything else in chat. So yes, everyone, be looking for my email to you after this event is over, and you can request to join my email list. And I only send emails out when I have an event coming up, and I do not share my list with anybody. So I would welcome you to get on it. All right. Matt, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think that we
Wait a minute.
there are a couple of other messages. Oh.
Thank you, Marina. I'm
Oh,
glad.
oh my goodness. Caitlin Wiley, she says, thank you, Marina. I'm glad I was able to listen this and learn about our history.
Oh,
My daughter and granddaughter. Oh goodness, I'm so glad you're here. She says, my mom and I were listening together. We love you. Hey, I love you too. And Becky B says, thank you for sharing this story. I want to thank all of you for just being present. I appreciate you taking part in this program, and keep on doing it. Keep on asking for history presentations. I think we need them from all periods of time throughout our world history. Hey, Yoon, I think it's time for some history about Korea. What do you think? You're muted, Hey, Yoon. Someone is speaking, but I can't really hear very well. Hey, Yoon, can you unmute? I don't know if I can unmute you. Let's see. Oh.
Right, yeah.
Okay, I'm asking a few of you to unmute if you can.
The city lots are on 2 hours free. So if you're in town,
Oh, okay, good. It looks, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, looks like previously when
Oh, okay, I just sent you another unmute.
Yeah, I just did. It looks like when I try to unmute, it says a host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves. So I don't know, something's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the question? I am so sorry.
Oh,
Marina?
don't you think it might be time for us to have more history events about Korea,
Absolutely.
Japan, and other places in the Far East?
Absolutely. I grew up hearing the story of Korean War time when what my mom went through. So history can only be passed down from generation to generation. And thank
Yes.
you for carrying this work. And I hope someone out there will just continue the story of, history of war and
Yes, and really, Far Eastern history is something that we mostly, at least in my generation, we did not learn in school. And we really need to. We need to know more about our world. Well, I'm thinking, Matt, what do you think? Are we through with our program?
Unless anybody else wants to speak.
That was excellent presentation. And thank you so much, Marina.
All right. Thank
It-
you to
It
everyone.
was excellent. It was an excellent program, and I'm happy you were able to come and do this.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Matt. I very much appreciate it. And yes, please let other libraries in the area know.
Yes, I
And
will.
I probably at some point will be planning a physical trip back to Michigan again. I came last year. I might do it again sometime in the future. So if they'd like to have me come live, I might be willing to do that as well.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah.
All right. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good
Have a
night.
great
Thank you.
night. The best to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.